Please join me in welcoming the World Bank's President, Dr. Jim Kim, and the Prime Minister of Singapore, Hsien Loong. Thank you. Let me start with our hosts today, Dr. Kim. You've just released the Human Capital Index. You and I talked about it earlier today, and it's the first time that the bank has done this. But, you know, the bank has always prioritized healthcare and education. So why have you done this now? What's the reason?
Well, actually, it's not true that the bank has always prioritized health and education. You know, looking back when I first came to the bank, we looked at the history of Korean borrowing from the World Bank. And first of all, up until 1962, the bank thought that Korea was so hopeless, such a poor country, that it would never be able to pay back a loan. So it didn't qualify for World Bank borrowing until 62. And then in 68, the second loan it took, first one was for a road, the second one was for education.
Right.
And it was ridiculed for doing that, because the idea was, first you go rich, first you build the infrastructure, you get rich, and then when you have the tax revenue, then you invest in your people. And that was actually an explicit strategy at the World Bank Group. There are stories of the World Bank saying things like, health and education, we're a bank, damn it. And there are quotes from leaders at the bank. And so we weren't always, and in fact, that's why in the early 90s, I was part of the movement to close the World Bank on its 50th anniversary. 50 years is enough. Because we specifically felt that there was too much focus on GDP and not enough focus on investing in people. So, after 6 years of being at the bank, I just felt, I saw that the levels of childhood stunting were so high, 25% of all the children in the world. The quality of education, our World Development Report on education last year, the quality of education was just stunningly poor. And we could then tell you, compared to a year of education in Singapore, how much education were children in, say, Malawi getting? And it was less than half a year.
My goodness.
So we felt like we had to change the incentives. We had to change what we measure, and we had to, in front of every single head of state or head of government, and especially in front of ministers of finance, we had to show that just these 4 outcome indicators that we put together were extremely highly correlated to economic growth going backwards, and we could only assume that they'll be more highly correlated going forward. And the ranking was a tough decision we had to take, because frankly, governments don't like to be ranked.
Yeah.
But what I've learned from the Doing Business report is that the ranking is what really captures people's attention. And I thought that this is so urgent, that this is an emergency, that we have to take the risk and capture everyone's attention.
So, Prime Minister, Singapore does very well in the business report, but it's at the top of the list in the Human Capital Index. Congratulations, as a fellow Singaporean, that makes me very proud. Yes, that definitely deserves a round of applause. So, you look back at how Singapore first started, and back in the years of independence, nothing like how it is today. So was this a plan from the beginning? How did you do this?
Well, we got some things right at the beginning, but we can't pretend to have forecast everything from the outset. We started off in quite a difficult position. The population was poor, the housing conditions were abysmal, health was not good, tuberculosis was endemic, we had cholera epidemics every now and again, and the birth rate was very, very high. These were the post-war baby boom years. And in the early 60s, the Singapore Maternity Hospital, where I was born, was the most productive maternity hospital in the whole world. So for the government confronted with all this, the first priority was just to get your head above water. And that meant get the population housed, build schools for their kids, have a family planning program so that you get the birth rate under control, have public health services provided, such as standpipes, so people could have clean, fresh water to wash and to drink and to cook with, and to have maternal and child health clinics. So the children can be inoculated, the mothers can be advised how to look after them, and we get everybody to a first base level. And that took us a certain distance. But after that, we had to make major steps. In healthcare, one of the things which we got right from the beginning was to say that we'll subsidize you, the state will help you pay, but you have to have a personal responsibility element. It should not be free, you have to co-pay. So one of the first things the government did upon being elected was to start charging for prescriptions. Because otherwise, the patient is given pills, he goes home, he takes it for 2 days, he doesn't feel better, he throws it away, he comes back again, another packet of pills. So we said, you just pay $1, you can afford it, but that means you will take it seriously. And we've kept that principle so that in the healthcare system, we expect people to pay some part towards their costs. Yeah. And we actually, many years later, made a scheme of compulsory health savings. So when you work, some proportion of your income, 6, 7, 8%, depending on your age and your income, goes into a MediSave account.
Right.
You will know what it is.
Yes, absolutely.
It's your personal account. You can use it when you get sick, you go hospital, helps to pay your hospital bills. You can use it if you have cancer, you can have it for chemotherapy or expensive treatments. And it inculcates a sense that this is your money, please spend it carefully. So on the user side, we never gave it away.
Yeah.
On the supplier side, the government is very much prominently there. We haven't left it just to the private sector. We used to run the government hospitals. They ran like government departments in the old days. They had no idea what it was costing them to run. It wasn't their job to know. Their job was just to treat the patients. Yeah. But if you're running the system, that's not a good arrangement. So we changed them to make them not for-profit outfits, autonomous, self-accounting, not for-profit, but bottom-line conscious. And that way you get efficient health care. At the same time, you don't get, or you are able to control the impulse of for-profit hospital to up the treatment so as to make more money.
Absolutely, Prime Minister. I suppose, Dr. Kim, that the point I'd like to make with you is that Singapore is a unique example. The size and the scale of the nation, it's a small country with a small population. But the whole idea of the Human Capital Index is so that the lessons from countries that have done well can be transplanted elsewhere, in theory, right? So are you seeing the kind of investment that we need around the world to be able to prepare us for the digital future?
Well, frankly, no, and that's exactly why we did this. I mean, I've been a health activist for most of my adult life, and we kept screaming at donors, please give more, give more, give more. And we went from a couple of $100 million, in the late 1980s, and then we're so grateful for Melinda Gates being here. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation changed everyone's sense of ambition. But then PEPFAR came along and the Global Fund, and we went from a couple $100 million to more than 20 billion spent on healthcare. But the thing that just overwhelmed me in the last 6 years was, as much as there has been a rise in ODA, there's just no way we're going to solve the problem of 25% of children being stunted in the world with calls for more ODA. There's no question we need more foreign assistance. We want everybody to be more generous, but we knew that leaders and ministers of finance would have to take the same kind of interest and responsibility as Prime Minister Lee took, right? And so one thing, I made a joke of it backstage, but the most remarkable thing about Singapore is that this is not a country that was full of crazy rich Asians for the last 100 years, right? This is a country that went from having low literacy rates, very developing country kind of morbidity and mortality numbers, to where it is now, because the leaders took responsibility and said, we are going to measure it, we're going to get there, we're going to try all the different innovations. And so what I hope is going to happen, so much of global health and education has been focused on supply. Yeah. Donors give more, and input. We put this much, this percentage of GDP. Now we're switching it, I hope, to outcomes and demand. In other words, the leaders, we hope, come to us and demand to know what does it take to get better outcomes. And of course, the example of Singapore is one that we're going to point to frequently.
And specifically, how will the Human Capital Index, do you think, galvanize people? Is it the ranking that will make them feel like, I've got to get better in the ranking?
Well, unfortunately, there have been so many studies that have shown the relationship between better health and economic growth, between better educational outcomes and economic growth. It's something, education as one of the best investments for economic growth. This has been known for a very long time. But what we're finding is that because there has been such a strong focus on donor generosity, which again, I agree with, been such a strong focus that I think some developing country leaders have been hiding behind that, say, yeah, you know, our health outcomes are dependent on whether or not the donors are generous.
Right.
And what we would say is, even without greater donor generosity, right now, if countries committed to collecting taxes, if countries got rid of regressive and not helpful subsidies like fossil fuel and agriculture, and in the case of the Philippines, they implemented a tobacco tax, the proceeds of which they put into health and education kinds of investments. So we know that it's possible. So what we're saying is to countries, look, if you're serious, we'll help you bring in more private sector financing for those things like, you know, infrastructure that we know are commercially viable, and then we'll help you manage your budget, you know, manage your spending in a way that you'll be able to improve dramatically your outcomes, especially if you invest in those things which have been proven to improve outcomes.
Absolutely. Now, just looking to the future, though, Prime Minister Lee, you know, so far Singapore has done remarkably well. There's no question about that. But do you feel that the job is done? You know, for the future generation of my children, for instance, in Singapore, how do you continue to invest in human capital? Because, well, the same things keep working.
No, the job is never done, because you reach a new level, there are new expectations, new challenges arise. For example, we've got a reasonably good education system now, but one of the things which we are focusing on is to pay a lot more attention on preschool education.
Excellent.
Because children come at the age of 6 to school at quite different levels. Some able to read, some able to write, some barely able to be literate and recognize the letters at all. And we want to bring everybody to a good starting point as early as possible in life, regardless of whether you are rich or poor, whether your parents are advantaged or disadvantaged. And that's a major area of focus which will take us quite a number of years. With healthcare, we also have to focus on quite a number of things. Hospital treatment is important, but you don't want everything to happen in the hospital. We need to look at step-down care, because particularly with old folks, when they are ill for a long time, but they may not need very high-tech medicine. They just need to be well looked after and be able to convalesce and recuperate. And in the end, and in the community as well. And we have to provide the step-down care facilities, and we have to provide people the incentive to stay healthy and to stay fit and to stay active.
Absolutely.
Active aging. So we've got old folks in their 70s and 80s who are learning to dance ballet and doing not badly.
I've seen evidence of that.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they are much healthier and happier for it.
Well, I went to Singapore and I specifically asked Prime Minister Lee to be on this panel, and he was very reluctant to, because he didn't. But I'll tell you why I asked him, because when I went to Singapore, I spent an entire day studying the healthcare system, because I couldn't believe that they were getting the outcomes they were getting and spending 4% of GDP. And then Prime Minister Lee corrected me, and he did it again in backstage. He said, no, it's 4.6%.
That's right.
But you know, the U.S. spends, what, 19% of GDP? Most of the European countries are 10 to 12%. China's already at 5%. And so to be able to get those kinds of outcomes at 4.6% was just stunning to me. I couldn't believe that was happening. But I think the reason I asked Prime Minister Lee, because every time I talk to him, he gives me this kind of detail. And I think that's what's going to be required.
Right.
Leaders are going to have to get into the details of what works in healthcare, what works in education. And an annual ranking that causes the newspapers to respond and opposition parties to question. This is the level at which we have to have this discussion, because going into the future with 38, 39% of your children stunted with poor educational outcomes is a recipe for disaster.
Absolutely.
And I felt that it was literally the moral and ethical responsibility of the World Bank to reveal this relationship between investing in people and economic growth, so that people couldn't say, well, we didn't know, right? From this day forward, no one can say we didn't know. We are making it clear. If you don't do this, it's not just that you're shortchanging an individual. What you're doing is setting your country up for instability and inability to compete in the future.
So, Prime Minister Lee, on that point, you know, given the fact that Singapore has had such remarkable success, what would your advice be for those in the audience, other finance ministers who want to replicate the success, those of us watching online as well, to be able to replicate Singapore's success story?
Well, I think the first starting point for the government must be that we want to improve lives for all of the population, not just for some of it or for the successful ones, but for all of the population across a wide range. Because if you do that, then as their basic lives improve and they have control over their lives and they have a roof over their heads and they can start thinking about the future and what they want their children to be, then you can talk about public health, then you can talk about improving and optimizing our healthcare system. Then we can talk about having a good education system and the parents are supporting it. And then from that, you have more growth, you have more prosperity, and we can make further progress with our social services. But you have to have that desire to make the benefits go very broadly, and then to have people have an incentive to improve themselves and their children.
And Dr. Kim, your sense of how you think this will be received amongst countries who are trying to replicate this success and get further up that ranking?
Well, I have to tell you, there were many, not many, but there were at least a few countries that really didn't want us to do the ranking.
I'm not surprised.
I'm very grateful to my board because the board really was supportive. And they were supportive not because they thought they knew where they were going to come out in the ranking, but I think they agreed. We were able to convince them that the relationship between these investments and economic growth is so clear, and maybe one of the most powerful correlations that we know of in terms of what you invest in and what you get later. And in the context of rapidly changing the world of work with technologies, is eliminating some jobs, but also definitely changing the kind of skills required for the jobs that are being created. Because we know all that, the board ended up supporting fully the release of the ranking. And I've said before, I think every World Bank president probably gets one ranking in their tenure. And so this is the one I chose because, again, we've just got to bring everyone's focus on this particular issue because we will fall prey to short-termism and not thinking enough about how critical this is to build the foundations of future growth.
Investing in human capital, it's so apparent that it is the way that countries need to prepare for the digital future. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us for this discussion. It is really a privilege and a pleasure. Thank you, Prime Minister Lee.
Thank you
Such
very
an
much.
honor, really an honor.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Kim, thank you so much. Thank you. Please.